want to release the report. That's all that I can say at this point.
It'll be the worst spectacle you can imagine. I think the Democrats are going to be cruel, as they were with Kavanaugh.
This individual resigned from the House of Representatives so this report would not be made public.
We have no higher priority than the protection of the Americans who work in our embassy, and we are going to continue to put their safety first.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. President-elect Trump's selection of former Congressman Matt Gaetz to be Attorney General, well, it's eclipsing, or it feels like it's eclipsing, the rest of Trump's transition back to the White House. For most of the day, our cameras and many other cameras were focused on this Capitol Hill doorway. Behind it, the House Ethics Committee was toiling in some form or fashion. That committee said late today, through its membership, that it did not have an agreement on releasing their report, that is to say the Ethics Committee report, into numerous misconduct allegations against Gaetz. This comes as Trump's pick, that is to say Gaetz, was on Capitol Hill trying to shore up support, for his confirmation. It's embattled. That's why he was there. Gaetz was joined with a little muscle by Vice President-elect J.D. Vance. Several meetings with Republican senators who will weigh that nomination occurred. We start tonight with Nicole Killian on Capitol Hill. Well, in a moment, we'll get to Ed O'Keefe in West Palm Beach. But Nicole, with you, catch us up on the activities or lack of activity today with the Ethics Committee.
Oh, trust me, there's been a lot of activity up here on Capitol Hill. My shoes can speak for that, and my Fitbit for that matter. But, look, what I will say is, yes, there was progress, and then there wasn't progress in the sense of the Ethics Committee. More specifically, we were outside for several hours awaiting a decision as to whether or not the panel would release that report into Matt Gaetz. It has been described as very damaging. Obviously, this investigation was centered around allegations of sexual misconduct and financial impropriety on the part of Matt Gaetz, although those are allegations that he has denied. But ultimately, we heard from the chairman of that panel, Michael Gaetz, who told me that there was no resolution, there was no agreement to release the report. However, shortly after he made that statement to me, we heard from ranking member Susan Wild, the top Democrat on the panel, who said, well, that's not accurate, that we didn't reach an agreement. She reminded reporters that the panel is evenly divided between Democrats and Republicans, and said that they were prepared to vote on the release. But again, ultimately, that did not happen. What she went on to say is that now the panel will meet again early next month. I believe the date is December 5th, to discuss this issue again. So while there was no resolution today, it's certainly a saga that continues.
And Nicole, just for the audience's benefit, walk them through the way this committee works, because it's different in its structure and it's different in its sort of collegiality than other committees. It doesn't typically operate, as I understand it, on a straight majority basis. They really do try, in all of these sensitive ethics matters, to reach a consensus.
Well, absolutely. And, they also try to keep their work under wraps, although that has been very challenging for them, given the high interest in this investigation into Matt Gaetz. I think memory serves me correctly in that, when we had the investigation into now ex-Congressman George Santos, that was another high-profile case. And in that instance, the House Ethics Committee did release its report against George Santos, who at the time was a member, but that ultimately led to his expulsion from Congress. But things are a little different now in the case of Gaetz, because he has since resigned from Congress. And that is the argument that Speaker Mike Johnson has continued to make to reporters here. Look, Matt Gaetz is no longer a member of this body. He is a private citizen. So from his standpoint, that report should be kept under wraps. Michael Gaetz, the chair of the ethics panel, for his part, said that that did not influence his decision in any way, even though he has some reservations about releasing the report. The other thing we continue to watch for is whether or not this panel, if they don't make it public, perhaps will they release it to the Senate Judiciary Committee. We already know that the chair of that panel, who for now is a Democrat, Dick Durbin, has already asked the FBI for its file on Matt Gaetz, because there was also a federal investigation into the ex-congressman. So again, whether or not these details ultimately come out remains to be seen.
And you mentioned your Fitbit and your shoes. That means you're moving from the Senate side to the House side rapidly. I've been through that. I know you've been through that. Describe for the audience's benefit, Nicole, what Matt Gaetz's day was like on Capitol Hill with J.D. Vance, the vice president-elect.
Well, it was mostly here on Capitol Hill, in the Capitol more specifically, not too far from where I'm standing, in an area where I'm sure you're very familiar, Major, you know, these areas where some high-profile senators, veteran senators, have these hideaway offices. So for much of the day, both Vice President-elect J.D. Vance and Matt Gaetz have been huddled with senators in these hideaways with great views of the Washington Monument, potentially, I'm sure. But you know, this was an opportunity for Matt Gaetz to sit down with a lot of these senators to explain his case. You know, some senators have told us that, you know, some of these allegations have come up, but at the end of the day, they say that Gaetz just simply wants a fair hearing, a chance to have his say, to explain the situation for himself, but also to explain his vision for the department. We know that certainly one of the reasons the president-elect brought him on is because he sees him as a disruptor, someone who can deal with what he and other Republicans feel is been a weaponization of the Justice Department. And so for that reason, that's why some are standing by Matt Gaetz. But again, this really was an opportunity for the Florida Republican to explain for himself why he wants the job and also to defend some of these allegations against him.
And a busy day on Capitol Hill. Nicole Killian, thank you for roaming here, there, and everywhere. We appreciate that. Want to go down to Ed O'Keefe in West Palm Beach. Ed, to the best of your ability, describe how the corridors in Washington have been viewed by the Trump transition.
Look, the fact that Vance is accompanying Gaetz to these meetings is a sign of how insistent and serious the president-elect is about making sure that his pick for Attorney General is ultimately confirmed. It's kind of like having a chaperone in the room, if you will, while having these conversations with senators, a chaperone with a direct report back to the president-elect. Well, that senator didn't seem totally on board. You may have to talk to him, boss. That's the kind of vibe that could conceivably exist here now going forward if Vance starts to show up for all of these meetings with senators with the more controversial picks. But they continue to stand by him, by Pete Hegseth. And the fact that these meetings are beginning now, amid all of the other announcements of candidate picks, suggests that the pace here is still quite fast and designed to signal to Washington he wants these people in place as quickly as possible once he's inaugurated in late January.
As you well know, Ed, Matt Gaetz is not the only story about or circling within the Trump transition. Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy penned an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal today outlining some of their priorities for this White House-adjacent panel on reforming and making, if possible, more efficient the federal government. What are your takeaways?
That's right. The Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, they have detailed for the first time in a Wall Street Journal op-ed what exactly they're thinking here. And the goal, essentially, if you read this, is to identify thousands of potential federal regulations that have been put in place mostly by agencies, not through legislation, but through the regulating process. Identify them as ones that the president could, in essence, either pause or completely eliminate. And in so doing, then also eliminate the jobs in the federal government associated with enforcing or overseeing those regulations. So that could conceivably mean people at all sorts of agencies, from the Consumer Product Safety Commission to the Transportation Department to the Labor Department, could be told the president wants you out because you no longer necessarily have a job to do. Now, you think to yourself, aren't there civil service laws that protect these employees? There are, in essence. But what Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are signaling in their op-ed is they're ready to challenge the scope or the guardrails around which protect federal employees, or what protects them, and when a president could conceivably remove them. They're arguing that if it's a cost issue, they can be laid off, and they're also saying that they would work to ensure that these people land somewhere in the private sector should they so choose. They also say they expect enforcement of a 5-day-a-week in-the-office mandate, which would be especially beneficial to the Washington, D.C. economy because so many have been staying home ever since the pandemic. They argue in this op-ed, you can't show up to work because of a pandemic-era regulation, you can get out. The other thing they list, common requests of conservatives looking to trim the federal sales. Things like funding for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, Planned Parenthood, wasteful Pentagon spending, a review of federal contracts writ large, which is notable, of course, because Musk has several through his various entities. And they argue that ultimately they believe a conservative Supreme Court with 3 Trump picks is going to stand by them in their attempts to dramatically curtail the size and scope of the federal government.
Ed, via your reporting and mine, it is the expectation within the Trump transition that President-elect Trump will name Russ Vought as the head of Office of Management and Budget. He would be an ally to Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk in this role. Would he not?
Not only an ally, really, yeah, an ally and an enforcer. And a few things notable about this pick that you and I confirmed this afternoon. One, he held the job of budget chief in the later years of the Trump administration. So he's been there. He has run what's called the Office of Management and Budget before. 2, DOGE, the Elon Vivek project, is set to be based in OMB, or that Office of Management and Budget. So in essence, they're working alongside Ross Vought, should he be the guy, to make these big changes. The third big thing, and this is where Democrats are going to be hitting heads against the wall, is Vought was a co-author of the 922-page Project 2025 that was put together by dozens of conservative activists who had either served in the administration or have worked in conservative think tank centers to come up with these ideas. He wrote a chapter on presidential power. He helped lay out the 180-day game plan for the beginning of the new Trump presidency. He is Project 2025 personified, and he'd be going right back to the budget office, which, of course, oversees all the cost and spending and policy of a new administration. It's an I told you so moment for Democrats, but one in which voters may not care ultimately, and we'll see if he can carry out those changes that Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy write about today.
With reporting and analysis, Ed O'Keefe, and just so everyone knows, Ed and I both know that Doge is a troll out of a digital currency. We're on to that, ladies and gentlemen, just to let you know. Ed O'Keefe, thanks so much. The U.S. is giving Ukraine a controversial weapon to slow a potential Russian advance, or the ones that are already going. We'll explain why the Biden administration is sending anti-personnel mines into the battlefield. That's next. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. In its waning days, the Biden administration has decided to provide anti-personnel mines to Ukraine. These attract a lot of attention because they are designed to be used against people, not vehicles or other military equipment. The U.S. has sought commitments from the Ukrainians to, if possible, limit the risk to civilians. Meanwhile, the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv is resuming services after closing today over the possible threat of a Russian missile attack on the city. The Kremlin has pledged to retaliate after the Ukrainians fired long-range American-made missiles into Russian territory. That occurred yesterday. Weijia Jiang joins us now from the White House. Weijia, great to see you. This is a busy set of decisions with possibly far-reaching implications. Walk us through them.
Well, Major, first on those anti-personnel landmines, it is significant that the Biden administration refused to allow Ukraine to provide these kinds of weapons because of the threat to, as you referenced, to civilians, because these weapons, if they are on land, the worry is that they could be detonated for decades to come. And so that's why there is consideration. But we did hear from the Pentagon, Major, and they say these U.S. supplied weapons are different than the ones that the Ukrainians would be building themselves or using because of their technology, essentially, that they are battery powered to last between 4 hours and 2 weeks. So after 2 weeks max, they will be inert if they do not go off. And the reason the U.S. says they're supplying them now is because they say Moscow has changed its tactics, and they're frankly using fewer tanks and more foot soldiers. And so they say that Ukraine has to be able to respond to that. But the point that the U.S. wants to stress, Major, is that they are doing whatever they can to reduce the number of civilian casualties by supplying this particular kind of landmine.
And Weijia, it also seems that the administration is taking steps to increase Ukraine's ability not only to defend itself, but to increase the costs of Russia of maintaining this war on Ukraine.
Right.
And there is increased conversation, at least about the possibility of either a ceasefire or some sort of resolution. It seems these moves on the chessboard are designed to expedite that, if at all possible, in the final days of the Biden administration.
Right, Major, and that is a big if, because that is exactly what the Biden administration has been trying to work toward now since almost the very beginning of this war. But there's really only two parties that can agree to that, Russia and Ukraine. And so Biden himself is running out of time to do that, as you alluded to. And so bolstering Ukraine in whatever way that it can in these final 2 months before the Trump administration comes in, because as we have been reporting, President-elect Trump has a very different view of how much aid the U.S. should be supplying to Ukraine. So while they are trying to create some sort of an off-ramp here, Major, it's difficult to see how that would happen in the next couple of months.
Weijia Jiang from the North Lawn of the White House, thank you so very much. President-elect Trump is expected to nominate the co-author of Project 2025. Ed O'Keefe just talked to us about that a moment ago, to lead the very powerful Office of Management and Budget. More on Russ Vought and other Trump nominees in waiting. That's next. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Thanks for hanging out with us. We're tracking the latest picks by President-elect Trump to join his incoming administration. I'm joined now by Molly Ball and Laura Davison. Molly is a senior political correspondent for the Wall Street Journal. Laura's politics editor for Bloomberg. All right, we're going to deal with Gaetz off the top, and then we'll get to other things. But I want to play you some sound from Capitol Hill today. First, Susan Collins, Republican of Maine, and John Kennedy followed from Louisiana following that. Let's roll it.
I said from the beginning that I was shocked by the nomination, given the many allegations, but that's why it's important that the Senate go through its process of making sure that we have a background check, that we have a Senate investigation, which involves extensive interviews and questionnaires, and then a public hearing.
We're going to vet all the nominees, not just Congressman Gaetz, and we're going to give them a chance to lay out their plans for the American people and for President Trump. And that's the process. That's the way.
See this ethics report?
That's the way it works. That's why God made committees.
Oh, that's why God made committees, for many other reasons than that. John Cornyn, senator from Texas, Republican, said that if they occur, the Gaetz confirmation hearings will be like Brett Kavanaugh's, only on steroids. Molly, your estimation as to whether or not the Gaetz nomination will last long enough for a confirmation to actually occur?
I think it will probably get to that point.
Okay.
What
we're going to air all this in public.
Well, that's
Your life,
part
Matt
of
Gaetz,
this
and welcome
is up to Matt Gaetz, right? And his tolerance for embarrassment or shame,
And his
which, as we
ability to
know,
count
is quite
votes.
high, and his ability to count votes. But what we've been hearing from the senators for days is consistent with those clips, which is that privately, a lot of them are really not into this nomination, but publicly they are withholding judgment. Publicly they are saying, let this get to a hearing, let us see the evidence, let us lay it all out. They don't want to be seen as rushing to judgment, and they don't want to be seen as obstructing the president-elect's agenda. Trump was here on Capitol Hill a week ago, and his message to the Republicans in the House and Senate was, you all owe me. I got you all elected, and now we have these majorities. And so they very much want to be seen as fulfilling what he wants to do.
Laura, your assessment of Gaetz and his process of confirmation hearing and likelihood to be confirmed.
So we still have 2 months exactly until Inauguration Day. That is a long time for the politics on this to change, more allegations to come out, more details. The House Ethics Committee said they would meet again on December 5th to discuss this. So there could be that report that they were meeting on today could come out. So there's a lot of, basically Washington-ness that we need to get through over the next several weeks and months. So what we're seeing today is just the tip of the spear. It behooves a lot of the senators to come out today and say, yes, we'll take a look at this, and then they find a piece, a little nugget that they can sink their teeth into and say, look, you know what, this one just will not stand.
I want to read to you both something that we just got in our internal email. It's from Nikki Haley, not central to the Trump transition, I grant you, but a voice of some note in Republican circles. She said this on her podcast today, not about Matt Gaetz. We're going to move on from Matt Gaetz, but Tulsi Gabbard, nominated by President-elect Trump to lead the Office of Director of National Intelligence. Here's what Nikki Haley said. This is a job for an honest broker without any pronounced policy biases. What are the facts about Tulsi Gabbard? She opposed ending the Iran nuclear deal. She opposed sanctions on Iran. She opposed designating Iran military as terrorists. She tried to limit Trump's war powers against Iran, tried to cut her annual defense budget. She went to Syria in 2017 for a photo op with al-Assad while he was massacring his own people. This, to me, was disgusting. Those issues are going to come up, are they not, Molly? All of them.
Absolutely, they are. And I think that is really where the rubber meets the road on all of these nominations, is when they get to these hearings or in their private meetings with Republican senators. And the question is going to be less, I think, about, what are these indiscretions in your background, and more about, okay, given that you were a Democrat until 5 minutes ago, how are you going to run this department in a Republican administration, whether it's
And are you an honest broker with our other intelligence partners?
Exactly. And so I think the senators are going to have now Nikki Haley is not someone that the Trump transition is listening to.
No.
They were very clear during the campaign that they were stiff-arming her. They don't believe her philosophy has any place in the Republican Party. That doesn't mean there aren't still a lot of Republicans in the Senate who do subscribe to those traditionally sort of Reaganite, hawkish, conservative views, particularly on national security and defense. So I think that she's going to get a lot of questions.
And
in that
Laura,
vein.
based on my interaction with Senate Republicans, they're like, yeah, there's a lot of Gaetz questions, but there are questions about Tulsi Gabbard and Pete Hegseth to run the Defense Department.
And RFK Jr. as well. So one of the things that helps all of these more controversial picks is because they are in good company. There's 4 or so that are kind of being bandied about as being, potentially problematic for confirmation. That makes it difficult for Senate Republicans to vote down 4 of these. They may decide we're going to pick one, have that be the sacrificial lamb, and let some of these other through so as not to upset, our own party's president. That's something we've seen in previous administrations. Usually there's 1 or 2 that don't make it through.
Right.
Usually they pull themselves out of the running, but I don't see any of these. They're all quite strong-headed and unlikely that they would pull themselves out unless it was clear that they must.
Molly, I read with interest an article in the Wall Street Journal about how the public health community lost confidence from the American public during COVID, and RFK Jr.'s nomination to lead the Department of Health and Human Services fits within that political construct, that sort of skepticism, if not outright hostility, to experts telling Americans how to handle COVID, and it may bleed into other issues. And based on my reading, a lot of people told me that RFK Jr. has, of these 4, probably the better chance of being confirmed, at least as it's being appraised right now.
I think there's going to be a lot of questions for him about, number one, the actual duties of the HHS secretary,
right,
which don't necessarily have a lot of bearing on some of the causes he's been more passionate about. Certainly vaccines, though, where his views are unscientific, not to say dangerous.
Flat out.
And so I think he'll get a lot of questions about that. And then, I think we also may see the business community mobilize in opposition to some of his views and potentially some of the other nominees, where Republicans have traditionally viewed themselves as allies to business and capitalism and so on. And if, the pharmaceutical industry is saying, look, we recognize there could be a need for reform here,
Long-time
but
Republican.
This is someone we think is not going to, be in the best interest of what Republicans want to do. And that is the line of thinking that I wonder if we won't start hearing from some of these Republican senators when they've had a chance to really sit with these nominees, is are they going to go to President-elect Trump and say, I see what you're trying to do here, but maybe this isn't what you intended. Maybe this person is actually going to undermine the things that you want to do in X, Y, and Z way.
Molly Ball, Laura Davison, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. House Speaker Mike Johnson says transgender women cannot use female bathrooms in the House of Representatives. Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace introduced a resolution to do exactly that this week. This directly impacts Sarah McBride of Delaware, who's set to become the first openly transgender member of Congress when the new Congress is sworn in January. Johnson said in a statement, quote, "Women deserve women's only spaces."
We're not anti-anyone, we're pro-woman, and I think it's an important policy for us to continue. It's always been I guess an unwritten policy, but now it's in writing.
In a statement, McBride said she's there to fight for the people of her state, not over bathrooms. The Human Rights Campaign, where McBride was once the National Press Secretary, said, quote, "This new, cruel, and discriminatory policy has nothing to do with helping the American people or addressing their priorities. It's all about hurting people," unquote. Vice President Kamala Harris won the historically blue state of New Mexico in the 2024 election, but by a much smaller margin than President Biden. New Mexico's Democratic governor joins us next to share her reaction. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. U.S. Customs and Border Protection is reporting a 55% decrease in migrant encounters along the southern border since President Biden signed new executive actions on immigration. Now, despite this recent decrease, immigration was basically a losing issue for Democrats in 2024. 90% of voters who cited it as their most important issue, well, they broke for Donald Trump. Joining me now, the Democratic governor of New Mexico, Michelle Lujan Grisham, otherwise known as the land of enchantment. Not the governor, but the state of New Mexico.
I'll take enchanting governor as well.
Very good.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to see you, Governor. We'll get to some policy things in a minute, but a couple of political questions. First, on election night, as you saw returns come in, were you surprised?
I was surprised. I mean, you want what you want. You believe in what's the best for the country. I fight for that. I work hard for that. I believe in the vice president and thought she ran a really remarkable race. And I think we too readily forget she did that in 107 days. And I'm really proud of that effort. So, of course, if you weren't surprised a little, then you weren't as engaged, I think, in that positivity about Americans are ready for a variety of things and are going to vote against extremism. But we didn't win, and I appreciate that we're having conversations about both parties and sort of the divisive divide. It's divisive between people and the divide between parties in this country.
According to census data, New Mexico, 49% Hispanic and Latino.
Only minority-majority state in the country.
Exactly. Vice President Harris carried it by 6 points. Joe Biden carried it by 10. Did that surprise you? And as you traveled around the state, did you detect a shift?
I was detecting a shift much earlier on, and I think we all did. People were very concerned about the economy, and you have to drill down. It's not just about jobs and employment, because New Mexico is one of the top economies now per capita in the country, and we have huge employment growth. I think we've added well more than 110,000 jobs, and for a tiny state of 2 million people, that's the largest increase in the history of the state. But you can't use that talking point without recognizing that if people are worried about their mortgages, and they are, and they can't pay for child care, and their groceries are too high, and their utilities are too high.
And rent and insurance are
all
aggravating.
Of it, it's just, then that's the issue they must focus on. So in my reelect, post-COVID, you can see this sentiment is already present around the country. And we can debate about whether we did enough or too much on one side, but it is an issue that I think we really need to get back to. It's a fundamental political issue. Bread and butter, kitchen table issues, of course, are going to be the primary issues that folks are going to be concerned with.
One of our CBS contributors, a gentleman named Chuck Rocha, and he's thinking about possibly running for the new DNC chair position. Whether he does or not is irrelevant, or it's relevant to him, but not to my question. He just said something on CNN I want to run by you. He said, I want to return back to the party that was when I joined it, fighting for middle-class values, being the party of workers, being the party of the common man, making Democrats fun again. What do you think of that?
I'm all about making all of us a little bit more fun again, because I see a lot of anxiety and angry. Oh, I think that when people are hurting, it's very easy to tap into anger. And I say shame on all of the politicians, irrespective of party, who feed and tell people to be angry, because that doesn't solve anything. I disagree with Chuck, and I'm a big admirer that we're not the party of the working people anymore and hardworking American families. But I don't think that we talk about it in ways or get enough done in ways that are meaningful. When you talk about the Beltway, Congress being broken, stuff gets very complicated. We're always trying to explain it and untangle it, and that's really frustrating. At the end of the day, can you make my bread less expensive? And I think we have forgotten, as elected and as policymakers, both parties, frankly. Republicans, which is why we reject them in New Mexico, are too extreme. No fundamental freedoms. No one, ban abortion. Nobody can be equal. You can't really go to college. We won't make investments in you. You're on your own. Every man, woman for themselves. Too extreme. But also, New Mexicans want you to deliver working family policies. We have a constitutional right to child care. We're almost there. Paid for universal child care, only place in the country. Free college, 2-year, 4-year, universal pre-K, rental assistance, mortgage assistance, more affordable housing coming, working on bringing all the other everyday costs down. So when you can connect your party to the policies that make a difference, and I'll tell you how big a difference. We went from 50th to 17th in the nation in childhood poverty. Why? Because we're investing in the health and stability of those families. Americans will vote for that.
I want to ask you about Governor Gavin Newsom in California.
I've heard of him.
Yes, I bet you have. Of Trump-proofing California. Governor Jared Polis in Colorado is teaming up with Governor Pritzker in Illinois to ward off authoritarian encroachments on their states. Do you share their fears? Will you join their cause?
So I think we're all going to do this, and I hope that we have more Republican governors. We should be holding every federal administration to the letter of the law. You cannot engage in unlawful, unfair activity, and you certainly should not be, as we are talking about with immigration, that we're going to use the military to do mass deportations. That is an unlawful practice.
How
it's
concerned are
inappropriate.
people in New Mexico about that prospect?
They're concerned. That's too extreme. They're very concerned. It's why they reject it. Here's what New Mexicans want. We'd like more border security. We would like to stop all illegal activity at the border. I don't want human trafficking. I don't want drug trafficking. I don't want guns. All of that should be not just debated, we ought to work to eradicate it. I want more Border Patrol agents. I want more smart security. I want all of it. The Mexicans want that. What they don't want is this inhumane and cruel set of policies that are meant to interrupt the economy. We're an ag state. We are clear what that does. We're also a different kind of state. I mean, New Mexico is 60% Native American Hispanic. For 400 years, these two groups have learned and done incredibly well, integrating, right, their priorities and policies, their families, their lives. That's not the same as a lot of other states that are struggling with immigration issues. It's a different population center. But on immigration, I think that Americans can and should be unified. Pass a meaningful, modernized immigration reform bill out of the Senate and out of Congress. Get that done. We all want that. And on people who are doing illicit work, criminals in this country, frankly, I don't care where you're from. You should be held accountable in every jurisdiction all across the country, and that includes people who are not here legally. I don't want them in my state. Frankly, I don't want them in Arizona or Texas either.
Michelle Lujan Grisham, Democratic Governor of New Mexico. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
The House Ethics Committee will reconvene the first week of December to discuss its report on Matt Gaetz. A Democratic member of that panel will join us next to discuss what happened in the committee's meeting today. That's next. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. The chair of the House Ethics Committee told CBS News this afternoon he opposed the release of that committee's report into Matt Gaetz, a former member of Congress, now the Attorney General nominee for President-elect Trump. The ranking Democratic member of that committee, Susan Wild, responded to those comments after the meeting. Let's take a listen.
I don't believe that we should be disclosing anything that happens in that committee room, and I would not be even commenting to this extent, except that the chairman has essentially suggested that there was agreement of the members of the committee, which there most definitely was not.
California Democratic Congressman Mark DeSaulnier joins us now. He's a member of the Ethics Committee, and for those keeping track at home, he has district offices in beautiful Antioch and Walnut Creek. Mark, it's good to have you with us. Thanks for joining us. Look, I know you are limited because of the procedures and the understanding of the Ethics Committee. To the degree you can, describe what happened today.
I can't, but I can reiterate what...
Can you shed any light on it at all?
Well, I can in so much as the House of the Rules makes the 5-member Democrat and 5-member Republican membership of the committee independent of the Speaker and the leader's office. And I can say that I, like the ranking member who you just had on, believes in transparency and openness. I believe that the Senate should have all the public information they can. So in a general way, I won't talk about what happened because that's how the rule applies. It's sort of like being a grand jury member. But I agree with the ranking member. There's a process we're pursuing. I'm not naive, but I have pretty strong faith that we're going to come to a bipartisan conclusion that allows the Senate to consider the report.
Congressman, the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Dick Durbin, told reporters today that it's his view that Matt Gaetz resigned so that the Ethics Committee would, for some period of time and possibly forever, be stymied on release of this report, that was the intent of his resignation. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I would agree with Senator Durbin.
Okay. Can you explain to the audience and to people who don't understand the day-to-day operations of the Ethics Committee what's at stake here? Because the Speaker says what's at stake is longstanding traditions. The Ethics Committee doesn't release reports generally, though there have been a couple of notable exceptions, on people who are now private citizens. The Senate says, well, there's a compelling national interest in knowing any relevant information about a potential attorney general. From your vantage point, Congressman, what's at stake here?
Well, first, as far as the historical record is, there have been multiple cases that show that we have not done it. But in all of those cases, the member never had public office again, nor were they nominated for any kind of public office. That's the difference. Nobody was ever had a report that was derogatory, that wasn't issued, that was nominated for or suggested, and in fact, never went on to hold public office again. That's the distinction in this case. And the precedent is not compelling, I don't think, that you never release it. It's only compelling because it wasn't released because the person who was investigated, who did the things wrong, recognized that and resigned from office and never tried to run for office again. This case, he's been nominated for all intents and purposes to be Attorney General of the United States.
Is it something you can say, Congressman, that this report is done?
Let me put it this way. I would have voted to release it today.
Okay, you would have voted.
In order to work together, that's the nature of the committee, is try to work together to get to a point where everyone on the committee would agree it's finished.
Would it be fair to conclude, therefore, Congressman, that the reason the committee decided to reconvene in early December is that it believes, that is to say the committee, that it can work through this process and get to that consensus that you're alluding to?
That's my hope. I don't want to lead you on because clearly there's a difference of opinion, but my hope is that's what will happen.
Okay. As has been said on Capitol Hill and in other contexts, hope is not a strategy. Do you have a strategy?
In so much that I'm a member of the minority party, will be next term, but we're supposed to work in a consensus, and I still have faith that we will do that on the Ethics Committee. So that's as much as I can say. I'm sorry, but these are the rules, and we try to comply with the rules, some of us.
Certainly. Let me ask you this, because I talked in New York on Monday to a lawyer who represents two women who testified to the Ethics Committee, and he went into great detail about their testimony. I'm not going to ask you about that. That's on the record. Not only with the committee, but it's on the record from CBS News. What I'm curious about, Congressman, is as the investigation went on, and it's been going on for quite some time, would you say the committee and its investigators were working collaboratively and on a consensus basis in pursuit of information, and there were no clashes over the legitimacy of that pursuit?
Well, first of all, I think all of us are concerned about the people who are the alleged victims right now. So we want to respect them. Secondarily, I can't really say any more than we're working through the process, and I have faith that we'll come to a place where the committee will put full transparency above any kind of partisan concerns.
I appreciate it, and I understand the confines with which you have to operate. I respect those, Congressman. Thank you for your time. Thank you for shedding as much light as you were able to on the situation today. Congressman Mark DeSaulnier from California, thanks so much.
Thank you for understanding.
The Democratic Party is looking for a new leader of the Democratic National Committee. We'll break down who's running for that position and their plans, such as we know them, for returning Democrats to power. That's next. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Really good to have you with us. The next chair of the Democratic National Committee will, metaphorically speaking, have to survey the damage and pick up the pieces. You know, party losses and everything. The race for that position, well, it's now well underway, at least partially. Commissioner of Social Security Administration Martin O'Malley and Ken Martin, the chair of Minnesota's arm of the Democratic Party, have announced campaigns. Both say they will prioritize messaging on the economy, saying that's a key to winning back constituencies lost in 2024. Aaron Navarro joins us now. Aaron pays very close attention to machinations within the Democratic National Committee. I'm very glad to have him with us. Aaron, we've described the who as we know them. What's the what for the DNC, as best as you can tell right now?
That's a great question, because I want to take a step back and look at what the DNC chair actually does. As members reminded me in calls this week, they do not set the policy, but they will be a key mouthpiece for the party as they're kind of finding their way out of the wilderness that was the November elections. They will be in charge of the national infrastructure, helping state parties build their own infrastructure, as well as fundraising. So a lot of the behind-the-scenes stuff is what this DNC chair, when they're elected, which is expected to be sometime early next year before the spring, that is what they will be handling. That is the role they will have, as well as whether they will do a sort of autopsy on the party after the November elections.
And Aaron, I want to raise something that you referred to there, that behind-the-scenes stuff, that's mobilization, voter contacts. You heard it, I heard it. Every reporter who was on a Zoom call or a conference call or bumped into a Democrat involved in the Harris campaign said, with this phenomenal ground game, it's going to be the difference maker. There's got to be some reassessment of how the DNC is going about that, what role it plays, and how effective it was or wasn't in 2024. True?
Yeah, it is true. And from talking to DNC members as well as Democrats here on the Hill, Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois told me that they want the DNC chair to really focus on winning and rebranding the party, taking a hard look at the brand of the Democratic Party right now after those devastating losses earlier this month. And just from talking to members, people running, people considering running, working class voters seems to be the focus. The economy seems to be the focus. Reconnecting the Democratic Party and what they want to do with the economy and giving a concise message to voters, that's something the DNC chair will help the party figure out in the next couple of years.
And Aaron, it strikes me, and I wonder if this has come up in your conversations, that the Democrats can't say, well, we didn't have enough money. There was plenty of money. And that money either was not well used or misspent or something. There's got to be some assessment of that too, right?
Yeah. And I mean, $1 billion Kamala Harris, the vice president, raised in her short time as the candidate. And that's been something I've been hearing from talking to strategists as well, is they are a little bit worried that, donors may take a look at that and say, we gave you all this money, yet we still had losses. Why would we continue to give you money? And that's something that the DNC chair, when they're elected, will have to figure out. That's why someone, at least from what I'm hearing from members like Ken Martin, who has deep ties to donors, deep ties to the DNC, a familiarity with the existing infrastructure, they say that he is a pretty good contender in this race.
Aaron, briefly, do you expect any others to enter the race, or do the Democratic National Committee members you've talked to expect this essentially to be the two that we've identified?
No, it's going to be, there's a good list of seriously considering. We have strategist Chuck Rocha, as well as a Michigan State Senator looking at this race, Mallory McMorrow. So they're definitely expecting the list to grow as the months continue.
List to grow. We appreciate it. Aaron, I know you'll keep us apprised of any and all developments on that front. Aaron Navarro on Capitol Hill. Thanks so very much. That does it for today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report starts right now.